Nobody plans to save a life at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. But that's when Tupac Shakur found himself standing on the 6th Street Bridge, trying to talk a stranger down from the edge. The man's name was David. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a cheap suit like he'd just come from work. But he wasn't going home. He was ending everything. Tupac didn't know him, had never seen him before. But something in the way David stood there, so calm, so decided, made Tupac's chest tighten. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a plan being executed. And when Tupac asked why, when he demanded to know what could possibly be worth this, David told him something that shattered every easy answer Tupac had prepared. He was dying to save his family. Literally, mathematically. His life insurance versus his debt. His death versus their survival. And suddenly Tupac wasn't just trying to prevent a suicide. He was trying to prove that the world wasn't as cruel as David believed it to be. Before we dive into this powerful story, if you're moved by these raw narratives about Tupac standing up for those the world forgot, hit that subscribe button and like this video. These stories take heart to tell, and your support keeps them alive. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now. The studio session ran long that night. Too long. By the time Tupac walked out into the Los Angeles darkness, it was past 3 a.m. The streets were empty. The city felt like it was holding its breath. He needed to clear his head, needed to drive, needed to let the night wash away the intensity of the music still pounding in his skull. So he drove. No destination, just movement. That's when he crossed the 6th Street Bridge and saw him. A figure on the railing, standing, not sitting, standing, arms spread slightly, body swaying, the universal posture of someone preparing to fly. Tupac's foot hit the brake before his mind caught up. The car jerked to a stop in the middle of the empty bridge, heart hammering, mind racing, every instinct screaming. He threw open the door and ran. The sound of his footsteps on concrete echoed through the night. The figure on the railing didn't turn around, didn't flinch, just stood there, balanced on the edge of everything. Tupac slowed as he got closer. Too fast and the man might jump, too loud and he might spook. Every step had to be calculated, every breath controlled. When he was maybe 10 feet away, he stopped, close enough to matter, far enough to not threaten. The man was young, mid-20s at most, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and cheap slacks like he'd just finished a shift at some soul-crushing job. His hands gripped the railing, white knuckles, trembling slightly. Tupac opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the man finally turned his head. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Tupac saw it. The decision was already made. This wasn't doubt. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a man who'd done the math and arrived at an answer he couldn't live with. The man looked back at the water below. Dark, cold, final. Tupac knew he had seconds, maybe less. He started talking, kept his voice low, steady, non-threatening, told the man his name, said he wasn't a cop, wasn't going to grab him, just wanted to understand. The man didn't respond at first, just kept staring down at the black water reflecting the sparse city lights. Then, without looking at Tupac, he spoke. His voice was hollow, defeated. He said his name was David, and he said he was sorry Tupac had to see this. Tupac told him not to apologize, told him whatever was happening, there had to be another way. People who loved him, people who needed him. That's when David laughed, a bitter, broken sound that had no joy in it. He told Tupac that was exactly the problem. People who needed him. A wife, a 3-year-old daughter, people depending on him to provide, to protect, to be the man they deserved. Tupac felt a crack of hope. Family meant reason to live. Family meant something to fight for. But David shook his head before Tupac could even say it. He explained in a voice so calm it was terrifying. 6 months ago his daughter got sick. Really sick. Meningitis. The kind that could kill a child in 48 hours if left untreated. They rushed her to the emergency room in the middle of the night, her tiny body burning with fever, her screams echoing through their apartment. The hospital saved her life, but the bills nearly destroyed it. Insurance covered some, the basics, but not the specialists, not the extended ICU stay, not the follow-up treatments, not the medications that cost more than his monthly rent. The numbers kept climbing. 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. He took out a loan from the bank, maxed out every credit card, borrowed from family who barely had anything themselves. Still not enough. Not even close. That's when he made the mistake. A coworker knew someone who could lend money quickly. No questions. No credit checks. Just cash and a handshake and a promise to pay it back. David took $20,000 from men who don't work in offices, who don't send bills through the mail, who don't forgive debt or accept excuses. The interest was criminal, literally. 30% compounded monthly. Within 3 months, 20,000 became 30, then 40, then 60. He'd tried everything. Picked up a second job doing night security. His wife started cleaning houses. They sold their car and rode the bus. Sold their furniture and sat on the floor. Sold everything that wasn't nailed down. Nothing made a dent. The interest kept growing faster than they could pay, and the people he owed weren't patient. They'd started showing up at his apartment, knocking on the door at midnight, asking about his family in ways that weren't questions, talking about his daughter's school schedule, mentioning his wife's route to work. The message was clear: pay or they'd take what they were owed in other ways. 2 weeks ago, they gave him a final deadline. 1 month. 60,000 in cash, or the interest would be paid in blood. David looked at Tupac then, really looked at him, and said the words that would haunt Tupac for years. He said his life insurance policy was worth $200,000, more than enough to pay the debt and leave his family comfortable. But suicide clauses usually void policies, unless it looked like an accident, a car going off a bridge, a tragic mistake on a dark night. The policy would pay. The debt would be settled. His wife and daughter would be safe. He'd done the math, over and over, every angle, every scenario, and this was the only equation that worked. His death was worth more than his life. Tupac felt something break inside his chest, because he understood the logic. Horrible, twisted but logical. In a world that measured value in dollars and survival in calculations, David had found his answer, but logic wasn't enough. Tupac started talking faster, told David about bankruptcy, about legal protections, about lawyers who could fight the debt, about ways to negotiate, to restructure, to survive. David shook his head at every suggestion. Already tried, already explored, already hit every dead end. The people he owed didn't care about bankruptcy. They weren't listed creditors. They were ghosts in the system, and they always collected. Tupac's mind raced. There had to be something, some angle David hadn't seen, some solution hiding in the darkness. Then it hit him. Money. The simplest answer. The one thing that could cut through all the complexity. Tupac's mind was already calculating. 60,000. He'd made more than that on a single show, spent more than that on studio equipment he barely used, lost more than that on bad investments, and people who'd betrayed his trust. $60,000 was just money. David's life was irreplaceable. Tupac told David he'd pay the debt, all of it, 60,000. He'd write the check tomorrow, today, right now if he had to. David turned fully around for the first time, stepped down from the railing. His feet touched solid concrete after being balanced on the edge for so long. He stared at Tupac like he'd spoken a foreign language. His face showed confusion, disbelief, the kind of shock that comes when the impossible suddenly becomes possible. He asked why. Why would a stranger offer that kind of money to someone he'd never met? Why would someone successful and famous care about a nobody drowning in debt on a bridge at 3 a.m.? Tupac didn't have a perfect answer, didn't have some rehearsed speech about charity or compassion, or doing the right thing. He just had the truth, raw and simple, because watching someone die when he could prevent It wasn't something he could live with, because $60,000 was just numbers in a bank account, but David's daughter deserved her father. Because life mattered more than money. Always. Because Tupac had seen too many funerals. Too many families destroyed by systems that measured worth in dollars instead of humanity. And he was tired of it. David's face crumpled. Tears he'd been holding back for months finally broke through. He collapsed onto the bridge, knees hitting concrete, body shaking with sobs. Tupac sat down next to him, put a hand on his shoulder, didn't say anything. Just let David cry out the fear and desperation and relief that had been crushing him. They sat there for a long time, the bridge empty except for two men and the weight of what hadn't happened. Eventually David spoke, asked if Tupac was serious, if this was real. Tupac pulled out his wallet, found a business card, scribbled his manager's number on it, told David to call in the morning. They'd arrange everything, payment, verification, whatever he needed to feel safe. David took the card with trembling hands, stared at it like it was a lottery ticket, a life preserver, a second chance he'd stopped believing existed. He asked what he owed Tupac, how he could possibly repay this. Tupac stood up, helped David to his feet, looked him straight in the eye and said the only payment he wanted was a promise, that David would be there for his daughter's 4th birthday, and 5th, and every birthday after, that he'd live, really live, not just survive but find joy and purpose and all the things that made the math wrong. David nodded, couldn't speak, just nodded over and over while tears streamed down his face. Tupac walked him back to his car, a beat-up sedan parked on the side of the bridge, made sure he could drive, made sure he had the card, made sure he understood this was real. David got in his car, started the engine, rolled down the window and thanked Tupac, not just with words but with his eyes, with every fiber of his being. Then he drove away, back toward a life that had just been given back to him. Tupac stood on the empty bridge and watched the taillights disappear into the Los Angeles night. The next morning, David called. His voice was different, still shaky but alive. Really alive. Tupac arranged everything through his accountant, verified the debt, identified the creditors, real name or ghost name, structured a payment that would erase everything and get these people out of David's life permanently. $62,000 when all was counted. Tupac never blinked, just signed the check. A week later, David came to Tupac's studio with his wife and daughter. The little girl was beautiful, bright eyes, shy smile, completely unaware how close she'd come to losing her father. David tried to thank Tupac again, tried to find words big enough for what had happened on that bridge. Tupac waved it off, told him the only thanks he needed was seeing that little girl grow up with her dad. That was payment enough. But there was something else, something Tupac needed David to understand. He pulled him aside, told him that life was going to keep throwing punches, money problems, health scares, 1,000 different emergencies, and the math would lie to him again, make death seem logical, make sacrifice seem necessary. But David had to remember what Tupac was about to say. His value wasn't measured in dollars. His worth wasn't calculated in insurance policies. His importance to his family was infinite, immeasurable, beyond any equation. The world would try to convince him otherwise, would try to reduce him to numbers on a balance sheet, but that was the world's failure, not his. David listened, really listened, and promised he'd remember. They shook hands. Then, impulsively, David hugged him, held on like he was holding on to life itself. When they left, Tupac stood in the empty studio and thought about the bridge, about the man on the railing, about how close the world had come to losing someone who mattered, and he thought about all the other bridges, all the other people standing on edges, all the other moments when the math lied and the world looked away. Years later, Tupac would get a letter from David with a photograph. The photograph showed a family, a man, a woman, 2 children. The little girl was older now, maybe 8 or 9, smiling wide, standing next to a younger brother. The letter was short, just a few lines, but they said everything. David had gotten a better job, moved his family to a safer neighborhood. His daughter was in 3rd grade. His son was 2. They were okay, more than okay. They were happy, and he thought about that bridge every day. Thought about the stranger who'd pulled over, who'd offered a lifeline when the whole world had walked past. He wanted Tupac to know that he'd kept his promise, that he was living, really living, finding joy in the small moments and purpose in being present for his kids. The letter ended with 4 words that Tupac would keep forever. Thank you for tomorrow. Tupac taped the photograph to his studio wall, right next to the mixing board, where he could see it while he worked. A reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is pull over, stop, pay attention, refuse to accept that anyone's worth can be calculated in dollars. Sometimes saving a life costs money, sometimes it costs time. Sometimes it just costs being present when everyone else drives past. But whatever the cost, it's worth it. Every time, without question. Rest in power. Tupac Shakur, you showed us that heroism isn't always loud or public or celebrated. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a conversation on a bridge at 3 a.m. Sometimes it's proving to someone that their life has value beyond any equation. You saw people when the world looked away. You stopped when everyone else kept driving. And you reminded us that the simplest act, paying attention, caring, acting, can change everything. Thank you for showing us what it means to truly save a life. If this story touched you, hit that subscribe button and like this video. Share it with someone who needs to remember their worth isn't measured in dollars. These stories honor Tupac's legacy of standing up for those the world forgot.